one reading.
Okay, good afternoon and happy Labor Day weekend. Any plans for Labor Day? We're going up to Massachusetts. As soon as I'm done here, I got to pick up my suitcase and drive up to the Berkshires, and that's where I'm going to be. Anyway, we're going back 36 years ago. I'm starting a series of the 1980s talks because I'm kind of bored of doing the 40s and 50s and 60s. And so when we scheduled this, I was still working on 1987, but we'll start with 86 and then go back to 87. 86 was an interesting year because Americans began to really dote on celebrity. But there was some scientific news this year. The Space Challenger blew up in January of 1986. Chernobyl in the Ukraine blew up in 1986. The Philippines had an election and it was corrupt. There was also something called Hands Across America, which was a charity looking to raise money where there was a human chain from one end of the country to the other end of the country, except there were gaps in the human chain. Margaret Thatcher runs again and wins in England. The Statue of Liberty reopened in 1986 after one of the repairs, 100th anniversary, and you can't really see it, but that's Nancy Reagan sticking her head out of the crown, waving to the crowd. Now, how many of you had Polaroid cameras back in the day? Where you took your picture and it came out 60 seconds later?
Right.
Well, Kodak tried to get into that business and Polaroid sued them.
Yeah.
Polaroid won. Oh, there was a report on pornography in 1986. Well, that's Donald Trump. That's Herschel Walker, who is now running for Senate in Georgia. I was at the United States Football League, National Football League trial on a daily basis. And I will tell you some stuff about that trial, which ultimately the United States Football League and Donald Trump won, but lost because their attorney was not a very good attorney and didn't figure out how much he should ask for in terms of damages. When I talk about celebrity, Mayor Clint Eastwood. Remember Mayor Clint Eastwood? Carmel, California. My father-in-law was a groupie, and he used to come with me to box when I was covering sports. He used to come with me and he'd get somebody to take a picture with him with famous people like that guy, Mike Tyson, who's somehow still around today. The Fox Broadcasting Company began as a fourth network in the United States that year. And Joan Rivers was the first quote-unquote star on Fox. Americans dote on celebrity. Oprah Winfrey goes national in 1986. And there was Al Capone's vault, where Jerry Rivers went to look for Al Capone. I'll tell you more about Jerry Rivers in a few minutes. And Phantom of the Opera debuted in 1986. And there was also the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductions. There was Jerry Lee Lewis. What a cool suit he's wearing, isn't it? Also, the New York Mets, last World Series championship the team won because partly Bill Buckner's error with the Boston Red Sox. But 1986, well, there's a scandal in the White House. It's called Iran-Contra, and there is Ronald Reagan. In 1981, Ronald Reagan approved an operation in which the CIA would aid Nicaraguan rebel insurgents who were fighting the newly established socialistic Sandinista government with the goal of preventing communism. Reagan wanted to stop communism. The Democrats, led by the Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill from Massachusetts, were against the operation. 1982, 1984, pushed through Congress the Bolin Amendments, two laws banning such aid, whether direct or indirect. But Reagan and his people didn't listen to Congress. In early 1985, the head of the National Security Council, Robert C. McFarlane, undertook the sale of anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles to Iran. Iran is at war with Iraq at this point. And the United States has no love for either Iran or Iraq, to Iran, in the belief that such a sale would secure the release of American hostages in Lebanon, that were taken by the Iranian-backed Hezbollah. And there is McFarland, National Security Council. 3 shipments of missiles went to Iran in August, September, and November 1985 with no success in eliciting the hostages' release. McFarland urged Ronald Reagan to negotiate the arms deal with the Iranian intermediaries, but McFarland said by late December of 1985 he was urging Reagan, don't do it, don't do it, don't bother. He resigns on December 4th, 1985, saying he wants to spend more time with his family, which means I'm in trouble and I've got to get out of Dodge City. So I'm going to spend more time with my family because they're the only ones that will understand me. He's replaced by Admiral John Poindexter. While there are the Sandinista soldiers looking for Contras, on November 3rd, 1986, the Lebanese magazine Ash Sharir exposed the agreement. The Arab language magazine reported that the United States had been secretly selling arms to Iran, a terrorist-sponsoring theocracy, in a bid to secure the release of 7 American hostages held by pro-Iranian groups in Lebanon. On November 25th, the Attorney General Edwin Meese revealed that on White House orders, the proceeds of secret arms sales to Iran were illegally diverted to the Contras, Nicaraguan rebels wagering a guerrilla war to overthrow that country's elected leftist regime. And you might recognize that guy. His name is Oliver North. And Oliver North was right in the middle of Iran-Contra. After Meese's disclosure, Reagan forced his national security advisor, the Vice Admiral John Poindexter, to resign and fired Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, a top Poindexter aide. Both men had played key roles in the scheme. Reagan accepted full responsibility. Yet he said he was kept in the dark about the diversion of funds to the Contras. So which one of those statements is right? There would be an investigation. Reagan vowed never to negotiate with terrorists. Reagan would call the president of Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, a dictator in designer glasses. And there's Oliver North. He's going to go before Congress. On December 9th, the House Foreign Affairs Committee started a hearing in Washington on arms sales to Iran and diversion of profits to Nicaraguan Contra rebels. Oliver North takes the fifth. He refuses to answer questions, although he pledged to cooperate fully with investigators at an unspecific date. The day before the Challenger blew up, in January of 1986, I was with my family, my 2.5-year-old and half-year-old child, at SeaWorld. And it was 19 degrees at night, but we had tickets to SeaWorld. Actually, I had comps to SeaWorld, so I had to use them that day. And the next day, we're flying back to New York. And you can see, we are dressed in layers because it's 19 degrees is a low in Florida. It was cold the day that the Challenger was supposed to go into space. It's January 28th, and it's cold. Maybe not that cold by New York standards, but certainly cold by Florida standards. At 11 o'clock, at 11:38 in the morning, Eastern Time, January 28th, the Space Shuttle Challenger lifts off from Cape Canaveral, Florida, and Krista McAuliffe. Remember Krista McAuliffe, the school teacher who went into space, or was supposed to go into space? She's on her way to becoming the first ordinary U.S. civilian to travel into space. She was 37 years old. She was a high school social studies teacher from New Hampshire who won a competition that earned her a place among the 7-member crew of the Challenger. She underwent months of shuttle training, but then beginning January 23rd, she was forced to wait 6 long days as the weather constantly delayed the Challenger's launch. On January 28th, the shuttle would take off. And it was a cold day. And there is Krista McAuliffe. Do you remember her? The school teacher? Remember her? 73 seconds after launch, hundreds on the ground, including her family, stared in disbelief as the shuttle broke up in a forking plume of smoke and fire. Millions more watched the wrenching tragedy unfold on live television. There were no survivors. Presidential commission headed by the former Secretary of State William Rogers, and that included Neil Armstrong, first man to walk on the moon, and the former test pilot Chuck Yeager, determined that the disaster was caused by a failure of an O-ring seal in one of the two solid fuel rockets. The elastic O-ring did not respond as expected because it was so cold. It was that cold at launch time, and that begins a chain of events that resulted in a massive loss. And that was the crew of the shuttle. The shuttle was named the STS-51L. It was the 25th flight of the space shuttle, 10th flight of the Challenger. Dick Scooby was the commander, Michael Smith was the pilot, and the mission specialists were Ellison Ozuka, Judith Resnick, and Ronald McNair. The two payload specialists were Gregory Jarvis, who was assigned to conduct research for the Hughes Aircraft Company, and McAuliffe, who flew as part of the Teacher in Space project. That is Uranus, the planet. And we get pictures, up-close pictures, that year in 1986. In January, NASA's Voyager 2, the spacecraft, flew closely to Uranus, radioed thousands of images, scientific data on the planet, its moons, its rings, the atmosphere, interior, and the magnetic environment around the planet. And it also discovered 11 previously unseen moons and detected 2 rings around the planet. Far cry from when I went to school and found out that, well, there were 9 planets. There are 8 now. Pluto has been dismissed as a planet. And the only one that had rings was Saturn. And now we find out that Uranus had rings. This is still in the news today for a different reason. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident in 1986. The Russians took over this power plant during the initial stages of this year's Russian-Ukrainian war, or more apt, or better description, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's April 26th, the number 4 reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and then was the Soviet Union at that time, during improper testing at low power resulted in a loss of control that led to an explosion and a fire that demolished the reactor building and released large amounts of radiation into the atmosphere. Safety measures ignored. The uranium fuel in the reactor overheated, melted through protective barriers. It was considered the worst nuclear disaster in history. Cost, casualties. At the time, it was rated at 7, the maximum severity on the International Nuclear Event Scale. The initial emergency response, together with later decontamination of the environment, involved more than 500,000 people, cost billions of rubles to contain. The reactor explosion killed 2 engineers and severely burned 2 more. A massive emergency operation put out the fire, stabilized the reactor, and cleaned up the ejected nuclear core. During the immediate emergency response, 134 station staff and firemen were hospitalized with acute radiation syndrome due to absorbing high doses of ionized radiation. Of these 134, 28 died within the days and months afterwards. 14 suspected radiation-induced cancer deaths followed within the next 10 years. 350,000 people were evacuated as a result of the accident. And there is the power plant after it went. To this day, nobody knows really how it impacted, and we're talking 36 years later, how it impacted the general population. The USSR, which doesn't exist anymore, built a protective Chernobyl nuclear power plant sarcophagus By December 1986, it reduced the spread of radioactive contamination from the wreckage and protected it from weathering. It also provided radiological protection for the crews of the undamaged reactors at the site, which were restarted in 86 and 87. It was a result, the accident, of a flawed reactor design, and it was not operated correctly by the personnel. How many of you remember Imelda Marcus's shoes? Remember her shoes? We found thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pairs of shoes, right? That's probably what people remember about the Philippine election in 1986. Afterwards, they fled, and there were shoes, just lots of shoes. 1986, Philippine presidential and vice presidential elections were held on February 7th. It was popularly known as a snap election. It is among the events that led up to the People Power Revolution, the downfall of the presidency of Ferdinand Marcos, and the ascension of Corazon C. Aquino as president. December 3rd, 1985, the Batasang Pamabasan passed a law setting the date of the election on February 7th, 1986. Marcos declared the early election since he believed this would solidify the support of the United States, silence protesters, and criticisms both in the Philippines and the United States. How would you like a presidential campaign to last 45 days?
Yeah, enough.
You know, I'm surprised. I watched the news today. I'm surprised they're not talking about the 2032 elections yet. You know, the midterms, it's all they talk about. I mean, I've been on these stupid pundit shows, and they tell you to make good television. Don't worry about facts, just make good television. Anyway, 45 days, that's it. That's the entire campaign, 45 days. From December 19th, 1985 to February 5th, 1986, the National Assembly proclaimed Ferdinand Marcos the winner of the presidential election, but a lot of people were unsure about that. It made big news in the United States. What's at stake? Marcos and Aquino. Aquino's unlikely rise began in 1983 when her husband, the opposition leader Nino Aquino, was assassinated on the tarmac of Manila's International Airport as he returned from exile in the United States to challenge Marcos, who was an adversary. The killing enraged many Filipinos and unleashed a broadband opposition movement that thrust Aquino, Mrs. Aquino, into the role of national leader. With public opposition mounting against Marcos, he stunned the nation by calling the snap election, he being Marcos, in a bid to shore up his mandate. The opposition included the Manila Archbishop Cardinal Jaime El Sin, who urged Aquino to run. And there is Ferdinand Marcos in the middle there. The National Assembly declared Marcos the winner, but the journalists, I don't know about that. Foreign observers, I don't know about that. Church leaders allege massive fraud. With the result in dispute, a group of military officers mutinied against Marcos on February 22nd, George Washington's birthday. Remember, Philippines once an American possession, and holed up with a small force in the military camp in Manila. On February 24th, against the advice of her security detail, Aquino appeared at a rally alongside the mutineers led by the Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile and the Lieutenant General Fidel Ramos, the military chief of staff and Marcos's cousin. From a makeshift platform, she declared, for the first time in the history of the world, a civilian population has been called to defend the military. The military chiefs pledged their loyalty to Aquino and charged that Marcos had won the election by fraud.
Sounds like today.
Reagan and Marcos were buddies. Reagan liked Marcos, and he cherished the friendship. Reagan was impressed by Marcos's exaggerated stories of his exploits as an anti-Japanese guerrilla and courted him among the world's freedom fighters in the struggle against communism. American officials supported Marcos until August 21st, 1983, the day that Cory Aquino's husband was assassinated at the airport as he returned from his American exile. Reagan didn't believe that the Philippines election was rigged, continued to support Marcos. Eventually, Reagan's inner circle said, hey, listen, Ron, listen. It was fixed. There was fraud. You better do something. Give up on your friendship. Reagan was fuming that Aquino won. He refused to grant Aquino the full honor of a state visit on her trip to Washington in 1986. February 25th, Marcos and his wife, well, they decided, let's go to paradise. We'll go to Hawaii. That's where we're going to live in exile. Meanwhile, in Libya, there is Gaddafi. Gaddafi and Reagan didn't get along. On April 14th, the United States launches airstrikes against Libya in retaliation for the Libyan sponsorship of terrorism against American troops and citizens. The raid involved more than 100 U.S. Air Force and Navy aircraft and was over within an hour. 5 military targets and terrorism centers were hit, including the headquarters of the Libyan leader, Muammar al-Gaddafi. Now, why the attack? What prompted the United States to attack? Well, in December 1985, 5 American citizens were killed in terrorist attacks at Rome and Vienna airports. Libya was blamed. Reagan ordered expanded sanctions and froze Libyan assets in the United States. March 24th, U.S. and Libyan forces clashed in the Gulf of Sidra, and 4 Libyan attack boats were sunk. On April 5th, terrorists bombed the West Berlin dance hall, known to be frequented by United States servicemen. 1 U.S. serviceman and a Turkish woman killed, 200 wounded, including 50 other U.S. servicemen. U.S. intelligence reportedly intercepted radio messages sent from Libya to diplomats in East Berlin. Remember, there were 2 Berlins at that time. West Berlin allied with the United States, France, England, East Berlin, which was a Soviet satellite, ordering the April 5th attack on the La Belle discotheque. Why the attack? Well, there's Reagan meeting with people. Reagan went on national television to discuss the airstrikes. When our citizens are abused or attacked anywhere in the world, we will respond in self-defense. Today we have done what we had to do. If necessary, we shall do it again. I don't really remember this, but then again, I wasn't part of this. But this is a group, this is in New York, Hands Across America, to raise money. Anybody remember Hands Across America? You do? Were you involved with it?
I remember.
Remember the phrase.
Okay, but did you hold hands with anybody? You did? Where were you?
I didn't hear it.
Oh no, were you part of that?
No.
No,
But I
okay.
know about it, yeah.
Hands Across America was a benefit campaign sponsored by USA for Africa. That's the same organization that did the the record, We Are the World, in which people within the continental United States joined hands in a human chain for 15 minutes. The event was organized by Ken Cragen, who was a music manager, who also helped organize the We Are the World recording session. The event took place on May 25th. 6.5 million people took part, but the 6 New England states, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, were not involved, so it wasn't a national thing. Cities across the United States formed the event route. Participants paid between $10 and $35 to reserve spots in line. The funds were diverted or delivered back to the USA for Africa in order to distribute the money for hungry and homeless, while the USA for Africa people planned to raise between $50 and $100 million. With Hands Across America, only $34 million was raised, and $15 million actually went to the charity after the costs to produce the event were deducted. Hey, Margaret Thatcher's in the tank. Here she is, she's in the tank. The English Prime Minister. On September 17th, the Prime Minister, Thatcher, is photographed riding a NATO training camp, riding a tank in the NATO training camp in Germany. She's running for re-election. And she's the Iron Lady. She's in a tank. Although she was never in any war, but at least she was in a tank. The popularity Margaret Thatcher gained during the Falkland Wars a couple years earlier was gone. Her privatization and antastic stance against the power of unions didn't make her too popular either. But she would be re-elected in a landslide in 1987. How many of you have gone to the Statue of Liberty over the years? Statue of Liberty. How many of you have been to the Statue of Liberty? You haven't been? It's okay. It took me about 60 years to get to the Statue of Liberty. In 1984, it was closed. Remember Lee Iacocca, let's get money for Ellis Island and all that other stuff? So it's closed to the public, underwent a massive restoration in time for the centennial celebration of France giving the statue to America. Even as the restoration began, the United Nations designated the Statue of Liberty as a World Heritage Site. On July 5th, it reopened to the public in the centennial celebration, and it just wasn't a little celebration. It was a network spectacular, as Helen Cosell would have said. It was a network spectacular done by David Wolper, who produced Roots in 1977, and it was for television. And Americans dote on celebrity. So who's there? Frank Sinatra. Who's there? Neil Diamond. And they're going to sing before a crowd, including President Reagan and other luminaries. The United States Navy led an international naval review with a multinational fleet of warships and tall ships paying tribute to the statue in New York Harbor. By the way,
I remember that.
who owns that statue, or who owns the land on that statue? No, the land that the statue sits on. Is it New York or New Jersey? They went to court and was ruled that it's New York's land. And she has her rear end facing New Jersey. Just thought you might like to know that. Okay, how many of you had the Polaroid camera over the years? 60 seconds, right? That picture came out, and eventually it would turn brown, right? Eventually it would turn brown. Well, Kodak decides with something called the pleaser to get involved in that market. Except they didn't have the patent for it. On January 9th, Eastman Kodak pulled out of the instant camera business because of a protracted legal battle with Polaroid, leaving 16.5 million owners of Kodak instant cameras without a source of film. Kodak gave up its 9-year patent fight with Polaroid after a federal appeals court refused to lift an injunction prohibiting Kodak from making or selling instant film. Any of you get stuck with one of those? So I never got stuck with it. Well, I could have got stuck with it, but I didn't. Kodak would pay $200 million as a settlement to 3.4 million people who bought the Kodak instant picture cameras from 1976 to 1986. Why? Well, the camera was useless. Some people use Polaroids to take pictures that they wouldn't show in public, which leads me to this guy, the Attorney General of the United States, Edwin Meese III, and the Meese Commission on Pornography. The Reagan people were going after pornography. They were going after porn makers, people who produce porn movies, among other things. In July, the Meese Report, named for Attorney General Edwin Meese, officially released the final report of the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography, a comprehensive investigation into pornography ordered by President Ronald Reagan. The report also documents what the committee found to be the harmful effects of pornography and connections between pornographers and organized crime. Richard Nixon's Commission on Obscenity and Pornography, which was published in 1970, recommended loosening the legal restrictions on pornography. Nixon didn't care. Reagan and his people did. Prior to the report's release, the commission chairman, Alan Sears, sent letters on commission letterhead to the heads of 23 convenience store chains and other companies declaring that the commission would find that they were distributors of pornography and threatening that they would be listed in the final report. The list of reported distributors had been identified by Donald Wildman, the head of the conservative Christian advocacy group that later became the American Family Association. The letters led several companies to remove common softcore pornography magazines such as Playboy and Penthouse from store shelves. And they wanted to get rid of this, Penthouse. All they had to do was wait about 20 years and then find out that the internet would get them off the newsstands, because that's what killed these magazines. The American Booksellers Association, the Council for Periodical Distributors Association, the Magazine Publishers of America, and the publishers of Playboy and Penthouse sued, arguing that the letters constitute prior restraint and were forbidden under the First Amendment. The U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia agreed, leading it to admonish the Commission, order it to withdraw the letters, and forbid it to issue any list of retailers in the report. Didn't sell. This thing became a book. It didn't sell. It didn't sell. New York publishers declined to reprint the final report of the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography, which the government printed, a government printing office issued in 2 volumes. But Rutledge Hill Press of Nashville rushed it out in an inexpensive 1-volume edition. Sold 30,000 copies. Americans didn't care at all, to anti-pornography organizations. But the religious bookstore said, we're not carrying it. There was too much vulgar language in it. And the book's graphic descriptions of sexual acts offended religious bookstore consumers. Tax Reform Act of 1986. Individuals didn't necessarily have to pay for things like baseball stadiums or football fields. That burden of taxation got shifted onto the public, starting in 1986 with the Tax Reform Act. And all these guys are laughing because probably their donors got big tax breaks out of it. The Tax Reform Act of 1986 lowered the top tax rate for ordinary income from 50% to 28%, raised the bottom rate from 11% to 15%. It was the first time in U.S. income tax history that the top tax rate was lowered and the bottom rate was increased at the same time. 1986. Oh, in sports, it was a sports owner's dream. Why? Because under the right set of circumstances, if a city built a stadium for a team owner, the team owner would only have to kick 8% in to the cost of the stadium. The other 92% picked up by taxpayers. That is Cincinnati. And that's what happened in Cincinnati. Reagan left an enormous impact on sports by putting his signature on the Tax Reform Act of 1986. The act opened a loophole in tax laws and gave owners ammunition in their battles with cities to get stadiums, like Cincinnati, where they built 2 stadiums and now talking about rebuilding the football stadium that opened around 2000. The laws gave municipalities a federal tax exemption on bonds to build new stadiums. And it spurred tremendous change in the sports industry. Owners were able to get new buildings with all sorts of revenue generating opportunities, from luxury boxes to club seats to higher prices for parking and concessions and in-venue restaurants. Cities decided to compete against cities for teams. The loser, the nickel and dime sports fan that used to want to go to, whether it was Senior Citizens Day, I did a big story, Senior Citizens Day for New York Newsday back in 2002, talking to people about how they used to take their grandkids to a baseball game. Senior citizens living on fixed income could see a New York Mets game for $2 and bring their kid. No more. They got rid of it. This is me in the middle. Let me go over there. This is Fortune magazine, 1986. This is me asking a question. This guy, Harvey Meyerson, who is Donald Trump's lawyer, he ended up in jail.
I remember.
Harvey Meyerson ended up in jail for bilking clients. It's my friend Bruce Morton back here.
That
That was the New York Southern District, New York down at Foley Square. She was across the street from Richard Nixon's office. The United States Football League started life in a swanky New York hotel on November 11th, 1982. And it died in New York in the courthouse in Foley Square about 4 years later. The original franchises, Arizona, Birmingham, Boston, Chicago, Denver, Detroit, Los Angeles, New Jersey, Oakland, Philadelphia, Tampa Bay in Tampa, and Washington. And they were doing okay. They had a 2-year deal with ESPN, 2-year deal with ABC, and they played their games in the spring. USFL began on March 8th, 1983. 11 days prior to its first games, the Heisman Trophy winner and underclassman Herschel Walker of the University of Georgia signed a deal with the New Jersey Generals. That signing would eventually change National Football League eligibility rules. But the USFL, now, Donald Trump unfairly gets the blame for putting the USFL on the ground. It's not quite the case. There were others who were there before him. He was the guy who just drove the final nail in the coffin. The original owners did a pretty good job of killing their own business. USFL had some strong franchises, and many weak ones like the Boston Breakers. Breakers encountered stadium problems, moved to New Orleans 1984, then Portland in 1985. Like a good number of USFL teams, they had financial problems. Why? Because they overpaid for players. There's Donald Trump. That guy in the middle is Harry Usher. He was the commissioner of the United States Football League. Guy literally was born in a trunk. His parents were vaudevillians, and he lived on the road, literally. Unfortunately, he died at a rather young age. I liked Harry. Harry was a nice guy. He had his wife and his mistress sit side by side at the trial, and his mistress was pregnant with his child at that point, Harry Usher. But Jane Ellison raised the kid because she was a widow soon there afterwards. Following the first season, the United States Football League, to pay off the debt, the losses, financial losses that the other teams incurred, decided, hey, let's expand and take that money and we'll put it back into our business. So it goes to Pittsburgh, Houston, San Diego, Jacksonville, San Antonio, Memphis. Donald Trump could not afford the franchise in 1982. He could not afford, he did not have the $2 million to get into the league. Why? He was too leveraged out with Trump Tower. But he would get into the league September 22nd, 1983. Chicago and Arizona swapped franchises. San Diego never played a game. They moved to Tulsa. Boston became the New Orleans Breakers. The league continued to be set with financial problems in 1984. Chicago and Pittsburgh folded. The Tulsa-based Oklahoma Outlaws merged business operations with Arizona, which had been in Chicago in 1983. The Detroit-based Michigan Panthers, owned by Alfred Taubman, who would eventually go to jail because of bad financial decisions at Sotheby's, hooked up with the Oakland Invaders. I kept up with all these people because I was with them for 7 straight weeks. Philadelphia moved to Baltimore to play home games, but the Stars traded Philadelphia. Washington relocated to Orlando. New Orleans ended up in Portland, and the United States Football League took over the Los Angeles Express, who among others gave Steve Young a $40 million contract. The lawsuit. Look who is to Donald Trump's left. Roy Cohn. Let me tell you the first time I met Roy Cohn. He's wearing a lavender suit to match his eyes, complete with the socks. Reeked of Old Spice. You couldn't get within 5 feet of him without a mask on your nose. He smelled of Old Spice. Anyway, there he is. He's Donald Trump's attorney going into the USFL trial. They got AIDS, but that's a story for another day. And Donald, as soon as he heard he had AIDS, Donald didn't know him anymore. The Spring League had plans to compete with the NFL in the fall of 1986, led by Trump and Eddie Einhorn, whose partner was, Shelley, I'm talking about you. Put down the cell phone. I know your ears are burning. His partner, the late Shelley Saltman, who was a good friend of mine. promised to take over the defunct Chicago franchise. They were going to move to Hawaii. If the league abandoned the March to July schedule, the league starts making moves. The USFL filed an antitrust lawsuit against the National Football League, charging it in part that the NFL monopolized the fall football television schedule. Trump somehow convinced his fellow owners that the league would thrive by going head-to-head with the NFL in the fall. Originally, the USFL brought in that famed attorney, Joe McCarthy's attorney, Roy Cohn, to handle the case, but settled on Harvey Meyerson, who, like I said, ended up in jail as their lead attorney, and there is the NFL commissioner, Pete Rozelle. We're down at Foley Square, and somebody must have said something funny because I'm laughing at that. I wore a tie in those days because I was going to court every day. So I figured out I better dress the part, right? Meyerson and the league would win the case, but they got $3, actually $1. It was triple. According to Carl Peterson, who is the general manager of the Philadelphia Baltimore Stars, the NFL and the USFL reached a tentative agreement that would have ended the lawsuit, with the NFL taking in 2 franchises, presumably Baltimore and Oakland. But there was one certain owner who said no. Who do you think the owner was who said no? He was left out of the settlement. Before I covered that, I am right there. The Tylenol, let's try that again. Tylenol poisoning. So far, just 1 bottle. This is a news conference up in Bronxville. Somebody took Tylenol and died. Tainted Tylenol. February 8th, Diane Elsroth died after ingesting 2 cyanide-laced extra-strength Tylenol capsules from a bottle that was purchased at A&P, which is now Acme, supermarket in Bronxville, New York. 2 blocks away at the Woolworths on Pontfield Road, which is now Value Drugs, 5 Tylenol capsules were found to be spiked with cyanide. There were Tylenol murders from drug tampering in the Chicago metropolitan area in 1982. Neither of those crimes have been solved. They both remain cold cases. Oh, me again with Donald Fear. It's 1995. Reason I bring that up with Donald Fear, simple. I'm sitting in a dugout in Winter Haven, Florida, 1991. I'm just talking to Donald, who's the head of the Major League Baseball Players Association. We're talking about stuff. And he says, Americans dote on celebrities. Now, do Americans dote on celebrities, or do celebrities have a super-sized image in the United States that they probably shouldn't? Yeah, okay. So Donald and I were talking about this in 1991, or 92. Americans dote on celebrities. Well, celebrities come out. 1986, Joan Rivers, Oprah Winfrey, Geraldo Rivera, or Jerry Rivers, depending on whom you're speaking with over at ABC TV. Mike Tyson. They're all celebrities, aren't they? Aren't they? I mean, is Geraldo or Jerry Rivers still a celebrity? Oprah, still a celebrity? Joan Rivers, until her death, a celebrity? Mike Tyson's still around today. Oh, Mayor Eastwood, Carmel, California. Clint Eastwood becomes the mayor of Carmel, California. On April 8th, he defeated the incumbent, Charlotte Townsend, to become the mayor of Carmel, a small seaside city in Northern California. He wanted to erect office buildings on property that he had within the city limits. Carmel elected officials said, can't do it. And he says, well, you know what, I'll show you. He sued, won in court, then decided, I'm going to run for mayor. And he did. He gets 2,166 votes, Townsend 799. During his 2 years, Carmel installed more public toilets, which may be laughable, but think of it. If there's no public toilet around and you really have to go, he'd be happy to be in Carmel because he understood the problem. More stairways leading to the beach, expanded the offerings of the local library. Served 1 term and that was it. Didn't take a salary either. Mike Tyson wins a world heavyweight boxing crown. He makes history. November 22nd, he's the youngest ever world heavyweight champion. He wins the World Boxing Council title by defeating Trevor Berbick in the second round. He was 20 years old, and the odyssey of Mike Tyson, not the boxer, Mike Tyson, the celebrity, begins. There's a fourth network in the United States. It's called Fox. In October 1985, 20th Century Fox announced its intentions to form a fourth television network to compete with ABC, CBS, and NBC. The plans were to use a combination of Fox Studios and the former Metro media stations like Channel 5 in New York, WNEW, to produce both and distribute programming. Organizational plans for the network were held off until the Metro Media acquisitions cleared regulatory hurdles. In December 1985, Rupert Murdoch agreed to pay $325 million to acquire the remaining equity in TCF Holdings from his original partner, Marvin Davis. The purchase of the Metro Media stations approved by the Federal Communications Commission, March 1986. Murdoch has 6 stations, could reach 22% of the national households. The business becomes known as the Fox Television Stations Group. Oh, Fox Broadcasting, or FBC, and it's not called FBC today, it's just called Fox, officially debuted with a soft launch at 11 p.m. Eastern and Pacific Time on October 9th. The plan fully launched in 1987. The first show, called The Late Show, hosted by her, Joan Rivers. Now the problem with Joan Rivers, which Fox didn't realize, is lots of people love her, but an equal amount of people despised her. There was no in-between with Joan Rivers. You either loved her or you hated her. That was it. So even though she did well on the Carson show as the guest host, doing 5 nights a week with Joan Rivers may not have been all that good a deal. Fox was looking for a host for its late night talk show for the network launch. Through its purchase of Metro Media, it had been clearing the Merv Griffin show, which was a really good show. Merv Griffin was really good at what he did, but opted to drop that program to make room for its own show. Murdoch's new network offered Rivers a job at a salary higher than what NBC was paying. She accepted. Johnny Carson never spoke to her again. She was his rival now. Faye Emerson was the only other woman to host a late-night talk show in network TV history back in 1949. Here's Johnny, and that was her first appearance, Joan Rivers, in February 1965 on the 17th. She credited that episode as her breakthrough. Carson said to her on the air, "You're going to be a star." Following this appearance, she became a frequent guest on the program and a close friend of Carson's. And she was popular. She was in the circuit with Lenny Bruce and Woody Allen and Richard Pryor, George Carlin and Dick Cavett. She thought they were her friends and peers, but she never felt that she was one of the boys. There was a lot of sexism in the industry. She ended up on Ed Sullivan, Mike Douglas, Dick Cavett, Girl Talk with Virginia Graham, and did material for the puppet Topio Gigio. And finally, she becomes the permanent guest host of The Tonight Show. In August 1983, Carson named Rivers his first permanent guest host on The Tonight Show. She jokingly referred to The Tonight Show life as having been Johnny Carson's daughter, a reference to his long-term mentoring of her. And this is before the feud. Johnny Carson never spoke to her again. Johnny was the first person who would say, yes, she has talent, yes, she's funny. He was the first person in power who respected what I was doing, realized what I could become. He handed me my career. She goes to Fox because NBC thinks that Carson is going to quit in 1987, and she is not on the list of potential replacements. She also, she explained that Carson got 2 years, she got 1. And, oh, speaking of celebrity, Elton John, celebrity or not? Cher, celebrity or not? Pee Wee Herman, celebrity or not? That was the roster, the first guests on the new Joan Rivers show. The show bombed. Young male viewers were uninterested in Joan Rivers and her show. Oprah. I have my thoughts about Oprah. Oprah was a performer, right place, right time, doing a junk show. All those shows were junk shows. They were all junk shows. A lot of people that went on these shows were actors who fooled the guests, but it didn't matter. I mean, these shows were not to be taken seriously, as Jerry Springer once said. She debuts on September 8th, syndicated by a pair of New Jersey brothers, Roger and Michael King. King World had been founded by Charles King, the old man. 1964, they had one property. How many of you watched the R-Gang comedies, or the Little Rascals? Yeah, with Spanky, right? Alfalfa. That was it. That was it. They had one show. They talk to Merv Griffin and they say, Merv, how about giving us Wheel of Fortune? Yeah, he does. How about giving us Jeopardy? Yeah. King World is on the map. King World, in partnership with Oprah Winfrey, launched Harpo Productions, the Oprah Winfrey Show. She was a TV host in Chicago and an actress. It was just another show in the genre pioneer Donahue vein. It was not Mike Douglas. It was not Merv Griffin, who were legitimate afternoon entertainment shows. It was what was called, or what we call, infotainment. A little bit of truth, a lot of entertainment with guests who were not exactly on the up and up. And speaking of people not on the up and up, there's Jerry Rivers, whose brother is named Craig. Craig and Jerry, but he assumed the persona Geraldo Rivera. The Mystery of Al Capone's Vaults was a 2-hour American television special that was broadcast in syndication April 21st of 1986, hosted by Jerry Rivers or Geraldo Rivera. I have a friend, Jim Williams, who worked on 2020, and first day he's working on 2020. That was Sam Donaldson. I was on Donaldson's show and Diane Sawyer. Anyway, his first day he's there, he says, well, where's Geraldo Rivera's team? I'm part of Geraldo Rivera's team. Guy looked at him, he laughed. You mean Jerry Rivers? He said, who? I said, yeah, Jerry Rivers. About 4 doors down. Just look for, he'll be in there. Jerry Rivers. The show, this one, centered on the live opening of a Waldorf underground room in the Lexington Hotel in Chicago, once owned by Capone. Turned out to be empty except for debris. But 30 million people watched the show. 30 million people watched the show. Why? Americans dote on celebrity. Geraldo or Jerry went from a good reporter. He was on Channel 7 here, WABC TV, and he did that documentary on Willowbrook and the conditions for disabled kids and adults in Staten Island at that facility. With the Capone show, Rivers, became a journalistic joke, but he became a celebrity. Hey, Top Gun is back. They released that movie again. It was released on May 16th of 1986, received mixed reviews from film critics, but what do they know? It grossed $357 million. It made $342 million. What do they know? How many of you saw Phantom of the Opera? Like it?
Yes.
Yes. Well, it opens at Her Majesty's Theatre in London, October 9th, with Michael Crawford and Sarah Brightman playing the lead roles of the Phantom and Christine. Story of a beautiful soprano who becomes the obsession of a mysterious masked genius living beneath the Paris Opera House. Andrew Lloyd Webber wrote the Christine part for his then wife, Brightman. Oh, the mask. When it started, it was a full mask. Now it's a half mask because you couldn't really do very much with your face covered in a full mask because the actor couldn't see, blurred his vision. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's first inductees, it's me at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2017. You might have heard of some of these people. James Brown, I Feel Good. Elvis, Heartbreak Hotel. Ray Charles, Sam Cooke. Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis, Buddy Holly, the Everly Brothers, a who's who of rock and roll. New York Mets win the World Series in 1986. They didn't win because he made an error, Bill Buckner, but he helped out with the Red Sox. The Red Sox look to be on the verge of winning the team's first World Series since 1918. Boston's leading the Mets 5-3 going into the bottom of the 10th inning. Game 6 at Shea Stadium. Mets tie it with 2 outs. Then Mookie Wilson hits a ground ball up the first base line, rolls through Buckner's legs, and error lets Ray Knight rush home from second base with the winning run. They would have just gone to the 11th inning under normal circumstances. New York would win Game 7 and the World Series, despite trailing by 3 runs at one point in that game. People blame Buckner for Boston's failure, not the team's poor pitching. Okay, the 1986 legacy. The United States Senate's Iran-Contra Committee's majority report found that the National Security Council had covertly raised money for the Contras, established an organization for supplying them with arms, attempted to ransom hostages, transferred arms to Iran, and diverted to the Contras money from the sales of those arms, all without presidential authorization. Poindexter and North were prosecuted. Poindexter's conviction reversed by virtue of his immunized testimony on appeal. Oliver North's conviction was reversed. Charges against him later dropped. The former Secretary of State Caspar Weinberger was also prosecuted, but in December 1992, the then President George H.W. Bush pardoned him and 5 others involved in the affair. Robert McFarland, the former Assistant Secretary of State Elliot Abrams, Dwayne Claridge, a former CIA senior officer, Claire George, Chief of CIA Covert Operations, and Alan Fears. On March 4th, 1987, Reagan said, "I'll take full responsibility for my own actions and for those of my administration. As angry as I may be about activities undertaken without my knowledge, I'm still accountable for those activities. As disappointed as I may be maybe in some who serve me, I'm still the one who must answer to the American people for this behavior." Mugshot of Ollie North. He might have been a bad actor, but he got hired by radio and TV executives. From 95 to 2003, he was the host of a syndicated radio talk show on Radio America, which was known as the Oliver North Show, or Common Sense Radio with Oliver North. Oh, on TV, he served as co-host of Equal Time on MSNBC, 1999 to 2000. North was the host of the television show War Stories with Oliver North, 2001 to 2016, and a regular commentator on Hannity, both on the Fox News channel, both shows. And if you ever wonder why people like me and colleagues of mine ever talk about TV in disparaging terms or radio, Oliver North is one of those people that we have in mind. He's a bad actor. He's a bad actor. And yet he gets rewarded by media. That's Gorbachev, passed away the other day. In 6 years, between 1985 and 91, he forged armed treaties with the United States, partnerships with Western powers to remove the Iron Curtain that had divided Europe since World War II and bring about the reunification of Germany. Yet in Russia, it's a different story. His internal reforms combined with economic and political liberalization helped weaken the Soviet Union or the USSR to the point where it fell apart. A moment that President Vladimir Putin once called the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. More 1986 legacy. On February 24th, 2022, Russian forces took control of all facilities of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant following the invasion of Ukraine. The Russians left the crippled nuclear power plant in March. After the Russians took control, levels of gamma radiation doses, rates in the Chernobyl exclusion zone were exceeded. The head of the United Nations atomic watchdog, Rafael Grossi, said Russia's temporary takeover of the Chernobyl site was very, very dangerous and raised radiation levels. But those levels have now returned to normal. Shoes, shoes, shoes! There they are. There are the shoes. When Ferdinand Marcos fled to Hawaii, he brought with him 22 crates of cash, $717 million, 300 crates of assorted jewelry with an undetermined value, $4 million worth of unset precious gems contained in a Pampers diaper box, 65 Seiko and Cartier watches, a 12 by 4 foot box crammed filled with real pearls, 3 foot solid gold statue covered in diamonds, other precious stones, $200,000 in gold bullion, nearly $1 million in Philippine pesos, deposit slips to banks in the US, Switzerland, Cayman Islands worth $124 million. All of that he got while he was the dictator. He dies in Honolulu, September 28, 1989. Imelda Marcos. Well, she had 15 mink coats, 805 gowns, 888 handbags, 3,000 pairs of shoes. Some reports said there was 7,500 pairs. Time magazine said it was only 1,060. The U.S. government documented that the Marcos family entered the United States with millions of dollars in cash, stocks, jewelry, and gold kilobars, inscribed "To my husband" on our 24th anniversary. In October 1988, Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos were indicted by a federal grand jury in Manhattan on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. In July of 1990, following a 3-month trial, she was acquitted of all charges. The United States, he died. The United States returned to space with astronauts on the space shuttle Discovery, September 29, 1988. There is Gaddafi. He was captured and killed on October 20th, 2011 after the Battle of Sirte. Gaddafi was found west after his convoys were attacked by NATO aircraft. He was captured by the National Transitional Council forces and killed shortly thereafterwards. Margaret Thatcher's legacy included deindustrialization, privatization, and she changed the face of Britain. She busted the union, and money left the middle class and went to the top earners. Old union towns never recovered from Thatcherism. Kodak is no longer a major player in pictures. Digital cameras have replaced film cameras for the most part. The Mies Commission on Pornography produced highly erotic literature, but has been forgotten. Scientists want NASA to return to Uranus. Oh, there's Clint Eastwood talking to an empty chair, 2012 Republican convention. Joan Rivers had other TV ventures after the Fox show was canceled. She was blackballed from the Tonight Show until 2014. Geraldo survived the Capone Vault show but became a TV punchline after a promising start to his journalistic career. Oprah was highly successful in the infotainment genre. Mike Tyson survived, never lived up to his boxing talent. He's become a celebrity after being a carnival act. Phantom of the Opera remains a significant franchise. Statue of Liberty reopened to visitors July 4th, 2013, 8 months after its home island, New York Harbor, was flooded and wrecked by Superstorm Sandy. The statue was fine, but the flood waters left docks, buildings, walkways, and electrical systems damaged on Liberty Island. The Boston Red Sox would win the World Series in 2004, first since 1918. There was a revival of the United States Football League name in 2022, and the new USFL, owned by 21st Century Fox and Fox Sports, began to play. Donald Trump went on to become the President of the United States. Top Gun was a new version of Top Gun came out this year. Tom Cruise became one of the biggest acting names of his generation. He was the star in the 2022 sequel, Top Gun Maverick. Because of COVID-19, the movie was delayed of being released for 3 years. The film was a blockbuster moneymaker for Paramount. Me and my old boss, John Mammon, I worked with him for 15 years. Fox got off to a shaky start. Joan Rivers was a failure. The network or syndication service had many weak affiliates on UHF. There were some good shows, Tracy Ullman, Gary Shandling Show, Married with Children, Simpsons, but the network really took off when Rupert Murdoch signed a deal to carry National Football League games in 1993. Fox picked up stronger stations in many markets that were formerly CBS stations. The reasons? The stations wanted to retain NFL games, and they wanted John Madden and got it. And with that success, Murdoch and Fox began plans to to start a new cable TV news network.
Thank you so much. Any questions?
Thank you.
Any comments?
What's next?
1985 or 1986.